Al Gore recently had a sequel to An Inconvenient Truth in which he blamed all of mankind for global warming. Arnold Schwarzenegger immediately jumped on board and also blamed mankind for global warming. Isn't that so typical? Two cyborgs getting together and saying, "Let's blame the humans." I am now going to talk about something which everyone is hysterical about if you're on the left, and everyone on the right is now excited about because we are no longer in these Paris Accords. First of all, the Paris Accords is a treaty that was supposed to actually be ratified by the Senate by a 2/3 majority, but President Obama knew he didn't have the votes, so he just agreed to the treaty anyways without submitting it to the Senate. That's not atypical of him, but something to remember because we never officially ratified this treaty. Now, we recently canceled our participation in it, but not before President Trump had already given $1 billion of taxpayers' money to a global climate fund. Now, where did that $1 billion go? Nobody really knows. They think that it might be used down in South Korea to fund this huge new bureaucracy that is supposed to redistribute wealth from Americans to other third world countries. And I'm going to dwell upon that a little bit later because all of those massive speaking fees have to be paid from somewhere. So you have to wonder when Hillary Clinton or President Obama needs a $200,000 speaking fee, could some of that money be coming back to them from these great global funds that have been arranged, that there's no audit trail, that all of the financials are down in South Korea? It's hard to say, but maybe some of our unemployed New York Times reporters can try and investigate where the money is. That's how Nixon came down. Why don't we investigate where the money's going on this issue? But let me get to my next slide. This is President Trump versus the Paris Accords, putting America first, and the Trump acceptance rejection disorder response. Trump acceptance rejection disorder, short for TARD. This is a great graph because before we can talk about the politics, we might as well talk about the science. Science is about facts and not just interpretations of the facts. This is a great graph because it shows that over the past 2,400 years, there have been massive fluctuations in the temperature. And the low point here is 54.3 degrees Fahrenheit, and the high point up here is about 58.3 degrees Fahrenheit, so you can probably figure this is about 60 or 62. So we're only talking about a 6-degree differential as we go through this period of time. But you all are familiar with the Romans wearing togas, right? I mean, everything that we learn about the Romans is that when Julius Caesar was assassinated, they were all wearing togas because it was so hot they couldn't wear much more than that or they'd sweat to death. This was when things were very, very warm. About 4 or 5 degrees higher than where they are today. Today we're at 57 degrees and this would be, what, about 63? So about 6 degrees warmer back in this period of time. So what affects these big swings in temperature, even over such a short period of the last 2,400 years? Well, there's a couple things that cause it, and CO2 emitted by man is not one of them. There are no automobiles being driven 2,400 years ago. All of our automobiles have been about in this period. So what has been affecting this? Sunspots, sun activity. If there's a lot of flares, the world heats up. If there's a lot of volcanic activity, that puts a lot of soot into the air so that the sun can't get down to the earth, then we cool down. So most of these cold periods are associated with huge volcanic activity. So the beginning of this cold period here, there was 10 eruptions in Italy and in the Pacific. Here we have Vesuvius. You guys have all heard about the Italian, what city was it that was destroyed by Vesuvius? Pompeii. Pompeii, wiped out by a volcano. Well, guess what? That started a really cold period at about the same time. And then we've had 55 eruptions that caused this very cold period. And here we have 90 major eruptions that caused a little ice age not too long ago, only about 600 years ago. And now things have got heated up a little bit and so forth. The important thing to remember here is that none of this is man-caused. There is global change, but it's not as a result of what man does. Now, interestingly enough, I thought, well, what could we do to really blow apart the Earth? What if we had a nuclear war? What if we had 50 to 100 nuclear bombs dropped? And I went and I looked at some studies, and that would immediately cause a big problem, because over a very short period of time we would end up wiping out a lot of our food supplies, but the actual change in the global temperature would only be 1.2 degrees. But because it happened immediately, and because of all the soot in the air, we would have some major problems that would be caused by lack of food production. So all of these six Fahrenheit differentials are way more than what we could even cause with a global war. Something to keep in mind. Because there are some people like Obama who doesn't think global war is serious. They don't think ISIS is serious. They think global change is the most serious thing, the most serious challenge that we are confronting today. Okay, now here's some more scientific facts. Now, this is CO2 production, and we go way out now, way longer than 24 years. We're going out 4,600 million years. So way into the past, back before dinosaurs. Most of the dinosaurs are here in the Jurassic period. But you can see there is at one point in our planet's history when CO2 production was way up here. And right now, we're way down there. So you can see a little spike down here, which is what the environmentalists are getting all excited about, that little hockey stick spike. And if you look in a tiny little period, it does look serious. But if you look over the period of history of the planet, it looks to be what it really is, an insignificant blip. Now you can also see that CO2 is not directly correlated with temperature, because this other blue line is temperature, and it goes way up, and you can see the differential is about 10 degrees Celsius. So it's 10 degrees Celsius, hotter here, ice age, hot, ice age, hot, ice age. We're actually down in a pretty low period. It's very cool right now. If we weren't generating a little bit of CO2 and generating a little bit more warmth for the planet, we might have an ice age that could end a lot of the life that we have on this planet. Because that's what these types of ice ages do. They wipe out species across the board. We're doing the planet a favor by heating it up a little bit. We really are. Now, here's something that's interesting. Let's go to the politics of what we were talking about, the climate, the Paris Accords. In this graph, you can see that the United States is a big producer of CO2 emissions. But starting in about the year 2000, we've been falling. We've been self-regulating without an international body telling us to. We've been doing it ourselves. We've been putting solar panels on our houses. We've been paying $5 billion in American taxpayer money to Elon Musk so he can go out with Solar City and put a bunch of new solar panels on and to build Teslas, which was one of our questions that we had earlier. And that's being subsidized. All of the batteries that they produce are not as efficient as using gas engines. So we have to subsidize it, and we currently are subsidizing it to the tune of $5 billion in taxpayer money. So if you recently noticed, when President Donald Trump decided to get out of the Paris Accords, Elon Musk quit in a big huff from the committee that was advising the president. Well, of course he quit, because the cat was now out of the bag. He wasn't going to get any more $5 billion subsidies to help his company. The handwriting's on the wall. So he threw a temper tantrum, he left, and hoped a bunch of liberals would go out and protest and beat up on some people. Hasn't quite happened yet, but give it a little bit of time. Now, what is China doing? China, have you ever seen the Chinese come to this great country of ours and they're wearing masks? They wear masks because they've been told how awful the weather and the air is in our area. But it's nothing compared to where they come from. Where they come from is so awful they get in the habit of wearing those, so they think they have to when they leave their country, And then they're amazed it's so much cleaner here. Well, the reason is you can see this dramatic increase in CO2 emissions. They're producing coal plants over in China, lots of them everywhere, and it's poisoning their own people. If there's anybody who should be instituting some of the things we've already done in America, it's China. It's horrible in China. And because there's so many more of them, there's 4 times as many, they're much worse environmental polluters than the United States. They're now worse than we are. Look how high they are on this graph. Now, per person, they're not as high, because there's 4 times as many of them. But as a society, they're about twice as high as the United States. And which direction is that graph going for them? Is it going down? Is it being tempered? Do they care about their environment? Do they care about making their citizens have less emphysema? Nah! They want to beat the United States. They're going through their Industrial Revolution, and it's looking just like Britain looked when they went through their Industrial Revolution, and you couldn't breathe in London. And if you actually read any Benjamin Franklin, he'll talk about how he couldn't even go outside because it's like secondhand smoke everywhere. It was horrible. We've been there, we've done that, we've reformed. These other societies have not. So what is the point of us putting additional restrictions on our coal plants in order to push these plants to other places that don't have any restrictions on their coal plants? Our coal plants are actually 90% cleaner than the ones that they used to have in London. They're 90% cleaner than the ones they have in China. They're way more cleaner than the ones they have in India. So why would we voluntarily handicap ourselves, shoot ourselves in the foot? We shouldn't. That's why Trump got out of this horrible agreement. And now I'm going to read to you some more facts that document this. I don't know if any of you actually paid attention to his speech because it's hard to find. The liberal media likes to take any justification for what Trump does and bury it. And then they interview people who have opinions, because opinions that don't have facts associated with them can say whatever you want. But in fact, the facts are on his side and our side, if you believe in American first. So let me read some of this. Compliance with the terms of the Paris Accord and the onerous energy restrictions that is placed on the United States could cost America as much as 2.7 million lost jobs by 2025. Lost jobs. Now, are those always coal miner jobs that are being lost? No. As a commercial real estate broker, I deal with industrial guys all day long. And I go into machine shops. And machine shops are telling me we're going out of business, Eric. A major component of what we design for aerospace is energy dependent. It's electricity dependent. And if I can go to Texas and make the same part for half as much in Texas, then I can make it here in California. And the military doesn't care where it's made. It goes into the same plane and they're looking for the lowest cost producer. Then the only way I can stay in business here is through some other genius plan of getting ahead on one of my other components of this little thing. I either have to be closer to the source that's asking me to make it, I have to have engineers who are willing to take a pay cut because it's sunny in California, but I'm being punished because of the energy problem. So it's not just coal miners who are losing their jobs, it's anybody who creates a product, manufacturers, that's energy dependent. So let's not just blame the coal miners and say, oh, well, we can throw 2.7 million of them out of business. It's not just them, it's us. So it's 2.7 million lost jobs by 2025, but let's look at what happens by the year 2040. By the year 2040, paper is down 12% under the Paris Accords. Cement is down 23%. Iron and steel down 38%. Coal miners down 86%. Natural gas down 31%. These are horrendous figures. And what this adds up to is a cost in the economy by the year of 2040 that is close to $3 trillion in lost GDP. $3 trillion. Now just to put that in perspective, since Donald Trump has been elected president, the stock market has been soaring. It has gone from about 18,000 to 21,000. That's the equivalent of $3 trillion worth of wealth. If you own stock, you are now richer. You're about 15% richer if you have a basket of stocks that have risen by that amount. All of that would be wiped out if we stayed in these accords. And who would suffer? Donald Trump doesn't own the whole stock market. He owns, a good portion, but not all of it. It's the people in this room and the people out there that own the majority that would suffer the most if you weren't fired. If you weren't one of the 6.5 million people now standing in a bread line. For example, under this agreement, China will be able to increase their emissions by a staggering number of years, 13. They can keep going up for 13 years. They didn't agree to the same onerous restrictions we did. It's all voluntary. And even if they did, they wouldn't have to actually have any type of auditing of what they've done. So this is just a self-inflicted wound that we were going to impose on ourselves, and thank God we haven't. So we can't build the plants, but China can. India is allowed to double its coal production by 2020. That's why India's line keeps going up. We are voluntarily, due to state regulations and self-discipline from the people who actually produce these, going down. Everyone else is going to go skyrocketing. But our costs are going to go way up if we stayed in the Paris Accords. Now, even if the Paris Agreement were implemented in full, this is the kicker, guys, with total compliance from all nations, it is estimated it would only produce a 0.2%, actually it's 0.02% in Celsius. Remember those huge fluctuations of 6 percentage points that's happening that has nothing to do with man on my earlier graphs? Well, if we shot ourselves in the foot doing this agreement, putting all of these people out of business, 0.02% of a degree is all that we would affect. In other words, this is virtue signaling on a mass level. Mass level, virtue signaling is where you do something that doesn't affect anything, but you allow yourself to pat yourself on the back as a result of doing it. Now you have to ask yourself, why would we do something in which the Democrats are putting not America first, but every other nation first? Why would they do that? Well, let's go back to that $100 billion climate fund. You see, that's called fleecing the American public. And that's what they do best. But I have other graphs to show you what they also do best. This is an Antifa march over in Berkeley. This is a pro-Trump supporter. He's been beaten up. He's lying on the ground getting medical attention. This is Donald Trump being assassinated in Central Park with $30 million worth of taxpayer money, subsidizing this play in which he's playing Julius Caesar and everyone in Congress stabs him to death with polite applause. This is our friend Kathy Gifford, who's either making a bad joke or encouraging more violence. Hard to know. And this is the result. Yesterday we have shooters asking, who is it who's playing that baseball game? Is that Republicans or Democrats? And when he hears it's Republicans, he whips out his gun and starts shooting. And the congressman is among 4 that are shot dead on the baseball field. It's getting out of hand, guys. And who's responsible for it? We should ask the 12,000 Twitter feeds who are calling for the assassination of Donald Trump since he's been elected. 12,000 people on Twitter using the words President Trump and assassinated in the same sentence. Instead of focusing on the Comey hearings, why don't we have our FBI actually track down the people who want to murder the president? Why don't we stop spending $30 million of taxpayer money subsidizing the murder of the president in a Julius Caesar presentation in the middle of New York? Why don't we enforce the law? Wouldn't that be amazing? And I have to ask yourself, if you're one of the Democrats out there who hasn't disassociated yourself from this, who hasn't condemned it, I have to ask you, search down in your hearts and ask yourself, where is the shame? Where's the shame? Disassociate yourself. Write these people off. Start criticizing them and regain the moral high ground. That's what we all need to be doing. We need to be doing what's right. Fellow Toastmasters.